If you open my wardrobe, you'll find lots of fabrics like these. I received many as a present when I got married. I took some from my mom because she has more than she'll ever be able to wear in her lifetime. And I always thought of this type of cloth as being very African, until I read a report that made me question whether we Africans should really use wax print as the cloth to show we're African. So I set out on a mission to find out more about the history of these fabrics. I have dozens of outfits made of what we call African print. These fabrics are very popular across Africa. They are also sometimes called Ankara, wax print, or kitenge. Most of us were carried in one of these fabrics when we were little. Our mothers wrapped them around their waists like aprons whenever they are doing house chores. Also, in Africa and across the diaspora, people embrace wax print as part of their identity, but most of what we have dubbed African print is actually made abroad, in the Netherlands or in Asia. So how African is African print really? Imane Aisi is a successful designer from Cameroon, based in France, and he was among the first Africans to showcase his creations at the glamorous Paris Fashion Week. Imane refuses to work with the so-called African print in his collections.
C'est très personnel. C'est très personnel.
It's a personal view. When you say that's an African fabric, what's an African fabric?
Et comme je me répétais, comme l'homme africain et la femme africaine ont
Is it the ones that have been made by colonialists? It's a shame.
mode africaine, des designers africains, c'est ici-là qu'on met
Because it kills African artisans' works. And it's really awful.
parce que ça tue le savoir-faire africain, tous les travaux.
Because it kills their work and all the fabric that is made by our artisans.
C'est très dommage. C'est une manière de tuer toute une chaîne de savoir-faire.
Designer Doreen Mashika from Zanzibar doesn't believe that rejecting wax print sends the right message.
In Zanzibar, we have the kanga, and the kanga is the print that has a historical story about the history of Zanzibar between India, Portuguese, and Arabs, and of course indigenous Africans. So we are a melting pot, and we are a mix. So it is impossible for me to say I don't work with this fabric because it's made in India.
The history of wax print can be traced across 3 continents. In the 1850s, the technique of using wax and dye to make patterns on fabric was already being used in many societies across the world, also in Africa. Around that time, the Dutch had colonized Java, which is present-day Indonesia, and there they came across the batiking technique applied by the locals. The Dutch went back to Europe and produced batik by machines, and then they tried to sell it to the Indonesians. They didn't like the machine-made fabrics, and so the Dutch had to look for another market, and they found it in West Africa.
When this happened, the nature of the fabrics changed. So then they would start to use more bright colors that people on the coast wanted. They would start to incorporate local signs and symbols, and to adopt other ways of printing that were popular on the West African coast.
Today, a large part of what we see on the market is either manufactured abroad or in Africa by companies owned by larger foreign companies. Take the Dutch company Vlisco, for example. It manufactures the fabrics from its main brand Vlisco in the Netherlands. Then it owns other companies in Ghana, GTP, Wooden, and Uniwax. With that, Vlisco dominates the high-end and mid-priced wax print market.
I think sometimes there's a certain luxury associated, for instance, with having something that's coming from Holland, or if it has a specific brand on it, because everybody knows that it's more expensive. And so, for instance, if you do buy from certain brands when you're sewing, sometimes it's a thing to have the border on the edge of your clothes, whereas if it was a cheaper fabric, people would cut them out.
Companies from Asia have also been exporting cheaper fabrics to Africa. The manufacturers have often been accused of counterfeiting designs by established companies like Vlisco. On top of that, foreign companies have led to the shutdown of many local manufacturers across Africa. But regardless of where and by whom they are made, African print fabrics have been used to send a strong Pan-African message for decades. Take the dashiki, for example, a loose-fitting African shirt often made out of the wax print design popularly known as Angelina. So, back to our original question. Is African print even African when most fabrics are not manufactured on the continent?
Yeah, I would say it's African because one, it was made in factories in Europe, but it was influenced by the tastes of people on the continent.
Over the years, African print has evolved into a fabric that even young people wear as a fashion statement. It's no longer just that thing that your aunt from the village wears. It's also becoming more and more popular in the West. From high fashion catwalks to Beyoncé's wardrobe, wax print is the fabric of choice when it comes to signalizing Africanness. It may be a controversial choice, but it's the fastest way to get the message across.